My parents wanted me to give up my room for their perfect adopted daughter. I made them beg me to stay. So I'd been living at home after college, paying rent and helping with bills while I saved up for my own place. My parents were always cool about it since I covered a third of the mortgage and did all the yard work. We had this routine where I'd cook dinner 3 nights a week, they'd handle the rest, and weekends we'd order takeout and watch movies together. It was actually pretty great until my aunt died in a car accident and my parents decided to adopt my 16-year-old cousin Gabriella. At first I was all for it because Gabriella needed family, and I figured having another person around would be fun. She moved in, and I helped her decorate her room, took her shopping for school stuff, even gave her my old laptop for homework. The first month was fine. She was quiet and stayed in her room most of the time. Then one night at dinner, Gabriella mentioned how she'd always gotten straight A's at her old school, and my mom's whole face lit up. See, I was never the academic type, got mostly B's and C's, went to state school, nothing special. But I had a decent job at a marketing firm and was doing all right. After that dinner, my mom started comparing everything. Gabriella helped with dishes without being asked while I apparently never did anything. Gabriella was studying for her SATs while I wasted time playing games after work. Gabriella wanted to be a doctor while I was just doing marketing. My dad jumped on the train too, talking about how Gabriella was going places and how proud they were to have such an ambitious daughter. One morning, Gabriella made breakfast for everyone, and my mom literally said it was nice to finally have a daughter who could cook. I'd been cooking for them 3 nights a week for 2 years. Then came the big conversation. My parents sat me down and said they thought it would be best if I found my own place. They said Gabriella needed stability, and having me there was confusing for her adjustment. They gave me 30 days to move out. My mom said Gabriella needed my room since it was bigger and she had so much studying to do. They actually thought I'd just accept this and leave quietly. I asked them about the rent I'd been paying, and they said that was just helping family, not real rent, so I wasn't a tenant. They said they'd help me find an apartment and even offered to cover my security deposit. Like that made it better. I went to work the next day and told my boss I needed to work from home for a family emergency. She was cool about it since I'd been there 3 years and never asked for anything. Then I started my plan. First, I stopped paying for anything. When the internet bill came due, I let it lapse. My parents asked why the Wi-Fi wasn't working, and I said I forgot to pay it since I was so busy looking for apartments. Gabriella couldn't do her homework, and my parents had to use their phone hotspots. Then the streaming services started shutting off one by one. Netflix, Hulu, Disney+, all gone. My mom asked why, and I said I was cutting expenses to save for moving. Gabriella complained she couldn't watch her shows. Too bad. I stopped cooking dinner completely. When my mom asked what we were eating on my nights, I said I already ate at work since I wasn't really family anymore. I also stopped buying groceries. The fridge started looking pretty empty since my parents only shopped for themselves, and apparently forgot I used to buy half the food. Gabriella started complaining about not having her favorite snacks. Then I got really petty. I started taking 4-hour showers right when Gabriella needed to get ready for school. I'd play music until 2 a.m. on weeknights when Gabriella had tests. I'd take work calls in the living room during her study time. My parents kept asking me to be considerate, and I'd remind them I was leaving soon anyway, so what did it matter? 2 weeks in, my parents were stressed. Gabriella was cranky from lack of sleep and bad internet. She started snapping at them about the food situation and how the house was chaos. She actually told my mom that maybe they should have thought things through before kicking me out. My mom tried to explain I wasn't kicked out, just encouraged to move on. Gabriella laughed and said that was the same thing. Then the mortgage payment came. My parents realized they'd budgeted with my rent money included. Without it, things were tight. Really tight. My dad asked if I could cover 1 more month while they figured things out. I said no, I needed that money for my new place. He got upset and said family helps family. I reminded him that Gabriella was their family now, not me. Week 3, Gabriella broke down. She missed her friends, hated the chaos in the house, and felt guilty about taking my room. She told my parents she wanted to go live with our other aunt 2 states away. My parents panicked. They'd already told everyone about their amazing adopted daughter and how well they were doing as parents. Gabriella leaving would make them look terrible. That night, they came to my room practically begging. My mom started talking first, and her voice came out all shaky and weird in a way I'd never heard before. She kept wringing her hands together and wouldn't look me in the eye while she said they'd made a huge mistake. She went on about how they didn't realize how much I actually did around the house until everything started falling apart without me. The Wi-Fi being gone, no food in the fridge, nobody cooking dinner, all of it hit them at once. Dad jumped in before she could finish and said they got so focused on helping Gabriella adjust that they completely missed how their treatment was pushing me away. He actually admitted they got caught up in Gabriella's achievements because it felt good to have a daughter who fit their expectations. He said he knew that was wrong and unfair to me. I noticed Gabriella standing in the doorway behind them looking absolutely miserable with her arms wrapped around herself. She said this whole situation was her fault for moving in and messing everything up. She told my parents she never wanted me to leave and actually looked up to me for being independent and having my own life figured out. My parents practically fell over themselves begging me to stay after that. They promised things would be different this time and offered to lower my rent by $200 a month. Mom said I could have all my responsibilities back without any more comparisons to Gabriella. She even suggested family therapy to work through the adjustment issues the right way. I sat there on my bed listening to all three of them grovel, and realized I had all the power now. It felt satisfying, but also kind of exhausting watching them panic like this. I told them I needed time to think about their offer, and reminded them their promises didn't mean much after they literally tried to kick me out. The look on their faces when I said that was almost worth the past 3 weeks of chaos. The next morning, I called Nadine from my room since I'd been working from home anyway. I explained the whole situation with my parents and Gabriella and the 30-day notice. Nadine listened to everything and then surprised me by saying her husband Mitchell worked in property management. She said he might have leads on affordable apartments if I decided to actually move out for real. I met with Mitchell that same afternoon at a coffee shop downtown. He brought his tablet and showed me listings for places within my budget. Looking at actual apartments with real addresses and rent prices made everything feel way more real than it had before. I realized I could actually afford to leave if I wanted to. Mitchell pulled up photos of a one-bedroom with hardwood floors and big windows that cost about what I'd been paying my parents. Seeing that place made my stomach do this weird flip because suddenly leaving wasn't just a threat anymore. It was a real option sitting right there on his tablet screen. That evening, Gabriella knocked on my door and asked if we could talk privately. I let her in and she sat on the floor with her back against my wall. She told me she'd been completely miserable since moving in because she lost her whole life when her mom died. Now she felt like she was ruining mine too just by being here. Her voice cracked when she said it and I could tell she'd been crying earlier. Gabriella admitted she never asked to be compared to me all the time. She said she actually thought I was way cooler than she was because I had a real job and my own independence. The constant praise from my parents made her uncomfortable because she knew it came at my expense. She said she could see how much it hurt me every time they said something. I felt myself soften toward her because I realized she was just a grieving kid caught in the middle of my parents' mess. I told her this wasn't her fault and that my real issues were with our parents, not with her being here. She looked so relieved when I said that, like she'd been carrying around this huge weight. We talked for another hour about her mom and her old school, and how weird everything felt now. By the end, I actually felt bad for her instead of resenting her presence in the house. The next morning, I woke up to knocking on my door before my alarm even went off. My parents stood there looking tired and nervous with my dad holding some papers. He asked if we could talk, and I sat up in bed while they came in and positioned themselves like they were about to give a presentation. Dad handed me 3 printed pages with bullet points and highlighted sections. The first page outlined a new rent amount that was $200 less than what I'd been paying before. The second page listed all the bills they'd take over, including internet, streaming services, and utilities. The third page had promises written out like a contract about stopping comparisons between Gabriella and me. At the bottom, my dad had added a handwritten note saying he'd handle all the yard work from now on, so I could have my weekends free. I read through everything twice while they watched me and waited for my reaction. My mom kept wringing her hands, and my dad stood there with his arms crossed looking hopeful. I set the papers down on my nightstand and looked at both of them. I told them their proposal missed the entire point of why I was upset in the first place. They offered me money and chores like that was the problem, but the real issue was how they made me feel like I didn't matter in my own home. I said I didn't care about paying less rent or having more free time if they were still going to treat me like I was worthless compared to Gabriella. My mom started to interrupt, but I kept going and told them the problem wasn't about things they could put in a written agreement. The problem was that they spent weeks making me feel replaceable and disposable after I'd been helping them for 2 years. I said they took everything I did for granted and then acted like Gabriella was this amazing gift while I was just taking up space. My dad opened his mouth to respond, but nothing came out at first. My mom's face crumpled and she started crying right there in my doorway. She sat down on the floor with her back against the wall and put her face in her hands. She said between sobs that she got so excited about Gabriella's grades and college plans because she always wished I had been more ambitious in the school. Her voice cracked when she admitted that watching Gabriella study and plan for med school made her feel like she was finally getting the daughter she'd imagined having. She looked up at me with tears running down her face and said she knew how terrible and unfair that was. She told me she was ashamed of herself for treating me like I was a disappointment just because I took a different path than she wanted. My dad knelt down next to her and put his hand on her shoulder. He said they took advantage of how easygoing I was and assumed I'd always just go along with whatever they decided. He admitted they got comfortable having me around helping with everything and forgot to appreciate what I was actually doing for them. Dad looked me in the eye and said watching me cut off all my support and stand up for myself made him realize they raised me better than they'd been treating me. He said I learned to set boundaries and demand respect, and they should have been proud of that instead of getting upset about it. My mom wiped her eyes and said she understood if I wanted to leave because they deserved it after how they acted. My phone rang while we were all sitting there in this heavy silence, and I saw Mitchell's name on the screen. I answered, and he told me about a 1-bedroom apartment that just became available in a building he managed. He said the previous tenant broke their lease early, so the place was ready to go, and he could show it to me whenever I wanted. I asked him about the rent, and when he told me the number, I realized it was actually less than what I'd been paying my parents originally. Mitchell said the apartment had been renovated recently, and had good natural light, and he thought I should see it before anyone else grabbed it. I told him I could come look at it on Saturday morning, and he said he'd text me the address. When I hung up, my parents were both staring at me. I explained that was Mitchell from work's husband who manages apartments, and he just found me a place I could afford. The color drained from my mom's face and my dad stood up quickly. I told them I was going to view the apartment on Saturday, and would make my decision about staying here based on whether they could actually follow through on respecting me. I said their written proposal was nice, but words on paper didn't mean anything if their behavior didn't change. My mom asked me not to make any quick decisions, and I reminded her they gave me 30 days to move out, so technically I was still within their timeline. Dad said they were trying to fix things and I told them I could see that, but I needed to know all my options before deciding anything. The panic on both their faces when they realized I was serious about leaving felt oddly satisfying after weeks of feeling like they didn't care if I stayed or went. I got ready for work and headed to my home office set up in the corner of my room. Around lunchtime, Caroline messaged me asking how things were going with my family situation. I gave her the quick version about my parents' proposal and the apartment viewing on Saturday. She immediately offered to come with me to look at the place and said she'd bring measuring tape and a checklist of things to look for in an apartment. I thanked her and said that would be really helpful since I'd never rented my own place before. Caroline sent me a list she'd used when apartment hunting last year, with things like checking water pressure, testing all the outlets, and looking for signs of pests or mold. Having a friend offer to help reminded me that I had people who valued me outside of my family situation. I spent the rest of the workday feeling more confident about my options than I had in weeks. Saturday morning came and I met Caroline outside the apartment building Mitchell had told me about. The building was older but well-maintained with a small parking lot and some trees around it. Mitchell was waiting in the lobby and took us up to the second floor. He unlocked apartment 2C and I walked into a space that was way nicer than I expected for the price. The living room had big windows that let in tons of light, and the floors were real hardwood that had been refinished recently. Caroline immediately started measuring the walls and checking the outlets while I looked around. The kitchen was small but had newer appliances and enough cabinet space for one person. The bedroom was about the same size as my current room, but it felt different knowing it would be completely mine. The bathroom had a shower and tub combo and everything looked clean and updated. Mitchell showed me the small balcony off the living room that overlooked the parking lot and some trees. He said I could move in within 2 weeks if I wanted the place, and all I needed was first month's rent and a security deposit. The landlord would run a credit check, but Mitchell said my job history and income would easily qualify me. I stood on that little balcony looking out at the trees and realized the choice was suddenly very real and immediate. I drove home after the viewing feeling like everything was about to change one way or another. When I walked into the house, I noticed right away that something was different. The whole place was clean in a way it hadn't been in weeks. The living room was vacuumed and dusted. The kitchen counters were cleared and wiped down, and I could smell cleaning products. I opened the fridge and found it fully stocked with groceries, including all my favorite snacks and drinks that had been missing for weeks. The internet router was blinking green instead of dark, and when I checked my phone, the Wi-Fi was working again. Gabriella's door was closed, and I could hear quiet music playing instead of her usual habit of taking over the common areas. My parents were in the kitchen and looked up when I came in. Neither of them asked how the apartment viewing went, and I didn't volunteer the information. The house felt different, like everyone was walking on eggshells waiting to see what I would decide. Later that evening, my mom knocked on my door and asked if she could give me something. She handed me several pieces of notebook paper covered in her handwriting front and back. She said she spent the last 2 days writing down every hurtful comparison she'd made and thinking about all the ways I'd contributed to the household over the past 2 years. I sat on my bed and read through page after page of specific apologies. She apologized for saying it was nice to finally have a daughter who could cook when I'd been cooking 3 nights a week for 2 years. She acknowledged that I paid a third of the mortgage consistently and never complained about it. She listed out all the yard work I did every weekend and admitted she never thanked me for it. She wrote about how I helped Gabriella get settled when she first moved in and gave her my laptop without being asked. Each apology was detailed and specific enough that I could tell she actually thought about her behavior instead of just panicking about losing my rent money. At the bottom of the last page, she wrote that she understood if I chose to leave and that she'd support whatever decision I made. I folded the papers and set them on my nightstand next to the proposal my dad had written. My mom stood in the doorway waiting, and I told her I needed more time to think about everything. She nodded and left without pushing for an answer. I spent the next hour sitting on my bed rereading my mom's apology pages and looking at my dad's proposal until the words started blurring together. Around 9 that night, I heard a soft knock and my dad came in carrying his laptop. He sat down at my desk without asking and opened up a spreadsheet that had rows and rows of numbers. He pointed to the mortgage line and showed me they were short about $800 every month without my rent contribution. He scrolled down to show me where they'd have to cut cable, reduce grocery spending, maybe refinance the house at a worse interest rate if I left. He wasn't asking me to stay because of the money, he said, but he wanted me to understand the real situation they were facing. He admitted they'd gotten comfortable with my contributions and hadn't planned for losing that income when they pushed me out. I looked at the numbers and saw how tight things actually were, how my rent had been covering more than just a third of the mortgage when you factored in utilities and food. My dad closed the laptop and told me whatever I decided, they'd figure it out, but he wanted to be honest about where they stood financially. After he left, I pulled out my own budget spreadsheet and compared the apartment costs to what I was paying here. The apartment would cost me about $200 more per month, even with the security deposit my parents offered to cover. The next afternoon, Gabriella knocked on my door holding her laptop and asked if I could help her with a college application essay about dealing with loss and change. She said the prompt asked about a challenge she'd overcome, and she didn't know how to write about her mom dying without sounding like she was asking for pity. We sat on my bed and I read through her rough draft, which was full of generic statements about grief and moving forward. I asked her what she actually felt when her mom died, and she started crying, talking about how she missed stupid things like her mom's terrible singing in the car and the way she'd always burn toast. We spent 2 hours rewriting the essay to include those specific details, and watching her open up about the grief made me realize how much she was still struggling. She admitted she felt guilty for being alive when her mom wasn't, and that moving in here felt like replacing her old family. When we finished the essay, she hugged me and said I was the only person who'd actually asked her how she felt, instead of just telling her everything would be okay. Working with her on that essay showed me she needed stability and support, just as much as I needed respect and appreciation from my parents. I spent the whole weekend thinking about my options while avoiding my family as much as possible. Saturday morning, I drove past the apartment building and sat in the parking lot imagining myself living there alone. It would be easier to leave. No more comparisons or feeling like the disappointment daughter, just me in my own space. But Sunday evening, I walked around the house noticing all the little things that made it home. The kitchen where I'd learned to cook. The yard I'd spent hours working on. The living room where we used to watch movies together before everything got messed up. Leaving would mean starting over completely, while staying meant potentially fixing something broken but important. The apartment represented freedom and escape, while this house represented family, if we could actually repair what went wrong. I made lists of pros and cons, talked to myself in the mirror, even called my friend Joshua, who told me to trust my gut. By Sunday night, I knew what I wanted to do, but I needed to make sure my parents understood this wasn't going back to how things were before. Monday morning, I got up early and waited in the kitchen for my parents to come downstairs. When they walked in looking nervous, I told them I'd stay, but only on a trial basis with specific conditions. First, we needed family therapy with someone who specialized in blended family dynamics, not just pretending everything was fine. Second, the reduced rent my dad proposed would continue because I wasn't subsidizing their mortgage anymore without proper acknowledgement. Third, all comparisons between Gabriella and me stopped immediately. No more comments about achievements or who was better at anything. Fourth, I wanted a written rental agreement that protected my rights as an actual tenant and allowed me to leave with 30 days notice if things went back to how they were. My dad started nodding before I even finished talking, and my mom grabbed a notepad to write everything down. They both agreed to every single condition without arguing or trying to negotiate. My mom asked if I wanted anything else added to the agreement, and I told her these 4 things were non-negotiable. Everything else we could figure out as we went. My parents didn't waste any time following through on their promises. My dad spent Monday afternoon drafting a proper rental agreement on his computer that included my monthly rent amount, my rights as a tenant, and the 30-day notice clause I'd requested. He printed it out and we all signed it that evening. Then he made copies for each of us to keep. My mom got on the phone Tuesday morning and called 4 different therapists before finding one who had experience with blended family dynamics and grief counseling. She scheduled our first appointment for the following week on Thursday evening and sent us all a calendar invite like it was a work meeting. Watching them take immediate action instead of just making promises felt different from all the times before when they'd say things would change, but nothing actually did. Gabriella came home from the school Tuesday and saw the signed rental agreement on the kitchen counter, then looked at me and mouthed, "Thank you," when my parents weren't watching. Thursday evening, we all drove to the therapist's office in awkward silence, nobody knowing what to say or how this was supposed to work. The waiting room had uncomfortable chairs and magazines from 6 months ago that nobody actually read. The therapist called us back and introduced herself without any of us making eye contact with each other. She had us sit in a circle and started by asking each person to describe what brought us to therapy, which made everyone shift in their seats and look at the floor. My mom went first and talked about adopting Gabriella and wanting to help her adjust, but somehow making everything worse. My dad admitted he'd gotten caught up in Gabriella's achievements and stopped appreciating what I contributed. Gabriella said quietly that she felt guilty for causing problems and missed her mom. When it was my turn, I explained how the comparisons and being kicked out of my room made me feel worthless and replaceable. The therapist listened to everything without interrupting, then said something that made my parents go completely still. She told them their grief over losing my aunt had led them to overcompensate with Gabriella while taking me for granted because I seemed stable and independent. She pointed out how they'd put Gabriella on a pedestal, which created pressure for her and resentment from me, when what everyone actually needed was to be treated like normal family members. She gave us homework about expressing appreciation for specific things and setting healthy boundaries around personal space and expectations. The session lasted an hour, and by the end, everyone looked exhausted but somehow lighter. The next week, Gabriella showed up in the kitchen on my cooking night and asked if she could help instead of just watching. I handed her a knife and told her to chop vegetables while I started the sauce for pasta. We worked side by side without talking much at first, just falling into a rhythm of cooking together. She turned out to be genuinely helpful in the kitchen, anticipating what I needed next and keeping the workspace clean as we went. While the pasta boiled, we talked about her day at the school and my project at work. Normal conversation without any tension or competition. When dinner was ready, my mom complimented the meal without mentioning anything about Gabriella's contribution or comparing it to previous dinners. We started cooking together every time it was my night, and developed this easy routine of working side by side, talking about random stuff while we chopped and stirred. Gabriella admitted one night that she actually liked cooking because it reminded her of helping her mom in the kitchen before the accident. My parents started making visible efforts to acknowledge the things I did around the house without being asked or prompted. My dad came outside Saturday morning while I was mowing the lawn, and thanked me for keeping the yard looking good all these months. My mom complimented a meal I made on Tuesday without adding anything about Gabriella, or how nice it was to finally have whatever. The changes felt small and tentative, but genuine in a way their previous compliments never had. Gabriella noticed too and told me privately that our parents seemed different, less stressed and more present. One evening my dad asked if I needed help with anything and actually waited for an answer instead of just assuming I had everything handled. My mom stopped hovering over Gabriella's homework and gave her space to figure things out on her own. These weren't huge dramatic changes, but consistent small shifts in how everyone interacted with each other. Saturday afternoon, I took Gabriella to the mall to shop for clothes that actually reflected her style instead of what she thought would impress my parents. She'd been wearing a lot of preppy button-up shirts and khakis that looked uncomfortable and stiff. We went through stores trying on different things until she found jeans and band t-shirts that made her smile when she looked in the mirror. While we were in the dressing room, she opened up about feeling pressure to be perfect to justify my parents taking her in after her mom died. She said she thought if she wasn't exceptional at everything, they'd regret adopting her and send her away. I told her that kind of pressure wasn't fair to put on herself, and that my parents should love her for who she was, not what she achieved. She tried on a leather jacket that looked nothing like her previous outfits, and asked if I thought my parents would approve. I told her to stop worrying about their approval, and wear what made her feel like herself. We bought the jacket along with several other pieces that reflected her actual personality, instead of some imaginary perfect daughter persona. Thursday evening we went back to therapy for our second session, and everyone seemed less tense than the first time. The therapist asked how the homework went, and my parents gave specific examples of appreciation they'd expressed during the week. Then she turned to Gabriella and asked how she was adjusting to the changes in family dynamics. Gabriella sat quietly for a minute before admitting she'd been afraid to show any weakness or normal teenage behavior because she didn't want to seem ungrateful for being taken in. She said she felt like she had to earn her place in the family by being perfect at everything, which made her anxious and exhausted all the time. The therapist looked at my parents and explained how their excessive praise had actually created more pressure instead of providing support. She told them Gabriella needed permission to be a regular teenager who sometimes got B's on tests and didn't want to study on Friday nights. My mom started crying and apologized to Gabriella for making her feel like she had to be perfect. My dad admitted they'd been so focused on Gabriella's achievements because it made them feel like good parents after everything she'd been through. The therapist gave us new homework about allowing imperfection and celebrating effort over results. Over the next couple weeks, my parents actually followed through on the homework from therapy. My mom stopped hovering over Gabriella when she did homework and let her figure things out without constant checking. One evening, Gabriella came down to dinner looking stressed and said she got a B on her biology test. My mom looked at her for a second and then said it was totally fine and asked if Gabriella understood the material better now. Gabriella's whole face relaxed and she nodded and said she did. Dad started asking Gabriella to do normal chores like taking out the trash and loading the dishwasher instead of treating her like some fragile thing who only needed to study. Gabriella actually seemed happier having regular responsibilities instead of being put on a shelf like some trophy. The house felt less tense when everyone stopped walking on eggshells around her grades and achievements. I met Mitchell for coffee on Saturday morning at this place near his office. He asked how the apartment search went, and I told him things worked out at home so I wasn't moving anymore. He seemed glad to hear it and said family stuff could be complicated, but it was good when people figured it out. Then he mentioned that Nadine had been talking about my work lately, and said I'd been doing really well on my projects. He leaned back in his chair and said he thought I might be ready for more responsibility at the company. I felt this boost of confidence hearing that, because work had been one area where I knew I was doing okay, even when home life was a mess. Mitchell said Nadine would probably want to talk to me soon about some opportunities, and I should be ready for that conversation. Monday morning, Nadine called me into her office right after I got to work. She had my file open on her desk and told me to sit down. She said she'd been reviewing my performance over the past 3 years and was impressed with how I handled client accounts and project deadlines. Then she offered me a promotion to senior marketing associate with a significant raise. I tried to keep my face calm, but inside I was freaking out because the timing felt perfect. Here I was dealing with family drama and feeling undervalued at home, and my boss was telling me I was actually good at my job and deserved more money and responsibility. I accepted on the spot, and Nadine smiled and said she'd get the paperwork started. Walking back to my desk, I felt like I was floating because someone finally recognized what I brought to the table. That night, I told my parents about the promotion over dinner. My mom's face lit up, and she said she was so proud of me for working hard and earning recognition. Dad raised his water glass and said he always knew I'd do well in my career. Gabriella grinned at me from across the table and lifted her glass too. She said she hoped to be as successful as me someday when she got a real job. Everyone laughed and clinked glasses, and it felt genuine instead of forced or obligatory. They asked questions about what the new position involved and how much of a raise I got. I told them the details, and Mom said we should go out to celebrate properly over the weekend. The whole dinner felt comfortable and warm in a way it hadn't since before Gabriella moved in. A few days later, Dad told me at breakfast that he'd been working with a mortgage broker to refinance at a better rate. He said the new rate combined with my continued rent payments at the reduced amount would put them back on stable ground financially. He looked at me seriously and thanked me for giving them time to figure out a solution instead of just leaving when things got bad. I told him I appreciated that he was being honest about the money situation instead of pretending everything was fine. He nodded and said he'd learned his lesson about taking my contributions for granted. Mom came into the kitchen and added that they were grateful I stayed and worked through the problems with them. It felt like we were finally on the same page about what everyone brought to the household. The following weekend, Gabriella asked if she could have some friends over to hang out. I told her that was totally fine and I'd stay out of their way. 3 girls showed up Saturday afternoon and they all piled into the living room with snacks and music. I came through to grab a drink from the kitchen and stopped to say hi instead of just ignoring them. Gabriella introduced me to her friends and told them I worked in marketing and just got promoted. One girl said it was cool that Gabriella had an older cousin living at home who had a real job instead of just mooching off her parents. Another asked me questions about what marketing was like and if I enjoyed it. I chatted with them for a few minutes before heading back to my room. Later, Gabriella came to thank me for being nice to her friends and said it meant a lot that I didn't treat her like she was invading my space. Sunday evening, my parents suggested we start doing movie nights again as a family tradition. Mom said this time Gabriella and I could take turns picking what to watch, so everyone got a say. We all settled on the couch with takeout, and Gabriella picked some action movie I'd never heard of. It was actually pretty good, and we all got into it, making comments and laughing at the ridiculous parts. Dad fell asleep during the last 20 minutes like he always did, and we teased him about it when the credits rolled. The whole thing felt comfortable and easy in a way it hadn't for weeks. No one was competing or comparing or trying to prove anything. We were just hanging out together like a normal family. I used part of my raise to order new furniture for my room, including a better desk and a comfortable reading chair. I also got some artwork and better curtains to make the space feel more like mine instead of just the room I grew up in. My parents noticed me measuring and planning and offered to help cover the cost as an apology gift for everything that happened. I accepted because it felt like a genuine gesture rather than them trying to buy forgiveness. Dad helped me assemble the desk and hang the artwork while Mom took Gabriella shopping, so we could work without interruption. When everything was set up, my room felt like an actual adult space instead of a teenager's bedroom. I could see myself staying here comfortably for another year while I kept saving. One evening, Gabriella knocked on my door and asked if we could talk. She came in and sat in my new chair and told me she'd been seeing the school counselor about grief and adjustment stuff. She said it was helping her process losing her mom and dealing with all the changes. I told her that was really good, and that our family therapy had been helping me too. We talked for over an hour about therapy and mental health, and how hard it was to ask for help sometimes. Gabriella said she felt less alone knowing I was also working on my stuff instead of having everything figured out. I told her nobody had everything figured out no matter how old they got. She laughed and said that was weirdly comforting. After she left, I realized we'd actually bonded over something real instead of just existing in the same house together. At our next therapy session, the counselor asked how everyone was doing with the homework and changes. My parents gave examples of letting Gabriella be more normal and me feeling more appreciated. Gabriella talked about her friends coming over and feeling less pressure to be perfect. I mentioned the promotion and how good it felt to be valued at work. The counselor smiled and said she could see how much progress we'd all made in 8 weeks. She suggested we were ready to move to monthly check-ins instead of weekly sessions since we'd developed better communication tools. My parents agreed, but said they wanted to keep working on things even without weekly appointments. Dad said the sessions had been eye-opening and he didn't want to slip back into old patterns. The counselor gave us some resources for continuing the work on our own and scheduled our next appointment for a month out. A few days later, I texted Joshua, my friend from college who I'd been avoiding during all the family chaos. We met up at a coffee shop downtown, and I filled him in on everything that happened with my parents and Gabriella. He listened to the whole story and then said he was really impressed by how I handled it. He told me most people would have just caved or blown up the whole family, but I found a way to stand my ground and still keep everyone together. We talked for almost 2 hours catching up on his life and work stuff, and before we left, he suggested we start hanging out regularly again like we used to in college. I agreed, and we made plans to grab dinner the following week. Having that friendship back felt good after weeks of being so focused on family drama. The next weekend, my parents decided to host a small dinner party with some extended family, including my Aunt Shirley. I helped Mom prep food in the kitchen while Dad set up the dining room table with the nice dishes we only used for special occasions. When guests started arriving, my parents made a point of introducing me to everyone as their daughter who works in marketing and just got promoted to senior associate. The pride in their voices sounded genuine instead of the fake enthusiasm they used to have when they felt obligated to mention my accomplishments. Aunt Shirley pulled me aside during appetizers and told me she was proud of me for standing up for myself with my parents. She said my mom had called her a few weeks ago, really upset about the whole situation, and Shirley had given her an earful about taking me for granted. I thanked her for having my back even when I didn't know about it. The dinner went smoothly with good food and conversation, and I noticed my parents kept finding ways to include me in stories and discussions instead of just focusing on Gabriella like they had been doing before. Gabriella seemed relaxed too, joking around with our cousins and not putting on any kind of perfect daughter performance. After everyone left and we cleaned up the kitchen together, Mom hugged me and said she was glad I stayed. A few nights later, Gabriella knocked on my door around 9 and asked if we could talk. She came in and sat on my bed looking nervous, then told me there was a boy at the school who liked her and she didn't know what to do about it. I asked her if she liked him back and she said she thought so, but she'd never had a boyfriend before and felt kind of lost. We ended up talking for over an hour about relationships and boundaries and how to tell if someone actually respects you or just likes the idea of you. Gabriella asked questions about my dating experiences, and I was honest about both good and bad relationships I'd had. She told me she felt like she could trust me with this kind of personal stuff because I didn't judge her or expect her to be perfect. I realized this was real sisterly bonding, not just us being polite housemates. When she finally left to go to bed, she hugged me and thanked me for the advice. I felt like we'd turned a corner in our relationship. The following week, I checked my savings account during my lunch break and realized I'd hit my goal for a down payment on my own place 6 months earlier than I expected. The promotion raise, combined with the reduced rent my parents were charging me, had accelerated my savings way faster than my original timeline. I sat there staring at the numbers, feeling this mix of accomplishment and uncertainty. I could start looking for a place to buy right now if I wanted to. But then I thought about how things were actually good at home now, how my relationship with Gabriella was getting stronger, how my parents were genuinely trying to do better. I decided to keep saving and stay put for a while longer, so I could afford something really nice when I did move out instead of just jumping at the first place I could barely afford. That evening, my parents asked if I had a few minutes to talk, and I felt that familiar anxiety spike, wondering what they wanted now. But Dad pulled out a folder with paperwork and explained they wanted to make my rental arrangement permanent with an actual lease agreement. He said having me there benefits everyone when we're all treating each other with respect, and they wanted to formalize it properly this time. The lease was for 1 year with an option for me to reassess at the end, and either renew or move out with proper notice. I read through it and everything looked fair, so I signed it. Mom said she knew I was saving to buy my own place eventually, and they supported that, but they wanted me to know I had a stable home here for as long as I needed it. At work the next Monday, Nadine called Caroline and me into her office for a meeting. She told us we were being assigned to lead a major project together for a new client, launching a product line in 3 months. It was the biggest project I'd been given since my promotion, and I felt this surge of confidence I hadn't had before. During our first planning meeting with the client, I found myself being way more assertive than I used to be, pushing back on unrealistic timelines and advocating for my ideas about the marketing strategy. Caroline noticed afterward and told me I seemed different, more sure of myself. I realized that standing up to my parents and setting boundaries with them had changed something in me. I wasn't just going along with whatever people wanted anymore. I was speaking up for what I thought was right and trusting my own judgment. A few weeks later, Gabriella came home with her first report card from her new school. She had a mix of grades including 3 A's, 2 B's, and 1 B-. She looked anxious when she showed it to my parents at dinner, like she was waiting for them to be disappointed. But Dad looked at it and said these were really good grades, especially for adjusting to a new school mid-year. Mom agreed and said she was proud of Gabriella for working hard and doing her best. Gabriella's whole face relaxed and she smiled. Later that night, she came to my room and thanked me for helping my parents understand that she didn't need to be perfect all the time. She said the counselor had told her the same thing, but hearing it from my parents felt different because they were the ones who had been putting pressure on her. I told her she deserved to just be a normal teenager without carrying the weight of everyone's expectations. The next weekend, I took Gabriella on a road trip to visit a few colleges within a few hours of home. We toured 3 campuses over 2 days, looking at dorms and classrooms and talking to students about their experiences. During the drive between schools, Gabriella opened up about her future plans. She said she'd been thinking a lot about what she actually wanted to do with her life, instead of just what sounded impressive. She admitted she wasn't sure she wanted to be a doctor anymore, and might want to study education instead, because she really liked helping younger kids with their homework and seeing things click for them. I told her that was a great reason to choose a career, and way better than just picking something because it sounded prestigious. We talked about how she could choose a path that made her happy, rather than one that would make other people proud. By the time we got home Sunday night, we'd covered so much ground both literally and figuratively. On a random Tuesday evening a few weeks later, my parents asked me to sit down with them after dinner. I felt that old nervousness again, but Dad was smiling, so I figured it wasn't bad news. He said they wanted to acknowledge that it had been exactly 4 months since the night they came to my room begging me to stay. Mom said they'd been thinking about that night a lot, and how badly they'd messed up before it got to that point. Dad made this joke about how it was the best-worst decision they almost made because it forced them to actually appreciate what they had, instead of taking me for granted. We all laughed and Mom got a little teary. She said she was grateful I gave them a second chance to be better parents. I told them I was glad things worked out too. The following Saturday, Joshua invited me to meet up with some of his friends at a bar downtown. I almost said no out of habit because I'd been so focused on work and family stuff, but then I realized I needed to actually have a social life outside of those 2 things. I met Joshua and 4 of his friends, and we spent the evening playing pool and talking about everything from work drama to terrible dating stories. His friends were cool and easy to talk with, and by the end of the night, we'd exchanged numbers and made plans to do trivia night the next week. Driving home, I felt this sense of balance I hadn't had in a long time. I had my family relationships in a good place, my career moving forward, and now I was building friendships and activities that were just for me. Living at home felt like a choice I was making rather than something I was stuck with, and that made all the difference. The next Sunday, I woke up early and found Gabriella already in the kitchen cracking eggs into a bowl. She looked up when I walked in and asked if I wanted to help make pancakes before everyone else got up. We started cooking together, and she told me about a test she was worried about, and I told her about the trivia night I'd planned with Joshua's friends. It became our thing after that, meeting in the kitchen every Sunday morning around 7 to make breakfast and talk about our weeks while the house was still quiet. Those conversations ended up being the best part of my week, because Gabriella would tell me stuff she didn't share with our parents, and I could give her advice without Mom jumping in with her opinions. 3 weeks into our Sunday tradition, Nadine called me into her office on a Wednesday afternoon. She closed the door and told me the company was opening a regional office in about a year, and wanted to know if I'd be interested in a management position there. I tried not to look too excited, but inside I was doing cartwheels because this meant real career growth while still being close enough to maintain the family relationships we'd rebuilt. Nadine said I didn't need to decide right away, but she wanted me to know they were considering me for the role. I thanked her and floated back to my desk thinking about how different my life looked now compared to those awful weeks when my parents wanted me gone. That same week, Gabriella came home announcing she'd gotten a small part in the school play. Mom immediately started gushing about how talented Gabriella was, and I saw Gabriella's face fall a little. I jumped in and said it was cool she was trying something new and asked what her part was. Gabriella explained she only had 3 lines as a background character, but she thought it would be fun. Dad picked up on my cue and said he was proud of her for stepping outside her comfort zone. The night of the play arrived 2 weeks later, and we all sat in the auditorium waiting for Gabriella's scene. When she came on stage and delivered her 3 lines, my parents clapped louder than anyone else in the room. Afterwards, Gabriella found us in the lobby, and Mom hugged her and told her she was proud of her for trying something new, even though it was just a small role. Gabriella's whole face lit up, and later that night she knocked on my door to tell me she was glad our parents were learning to appreciate effort over achievement. The following Saturday, Dad asked if I'd help him build a new deck in the backyard. We spent the whole day measuring and cutting wood and hammering boards into place. It felt good to work together without any tension, just enjoying the physical labor and talking about random stuff like sports and what we wanted to plant in the garden next spring. During a water break, Dad sat down on the grass and told me he was grateful I gave them a second chance. He said he'd learned not to take people for granted, and that losing me would have been the biggest mistake of his life. I told him I was glad things worked out and we got back to hammering. Our family therapist scheduled a final check-in session the next week. We all sat in her office and she looked through her notes from our previous sessions. She said we'd successfully handled a difficult transition and built healthier ways of talking to each other. The therapist told us to keep using the tools we'd learned and to reach out if we needed support in the future, but she felt confident we were in a good place now. Mom asked if we should schedule another appointment just to be safe, and the therapist said we could always come back if issues came up, but we didn't need regular sessions anymore. Walking out of that office felt like graduating from something hard but necessary. 2 days later, Gabriella burst into the kitchen waving an acceptance letter. She'd been accepted to a summer program for students interested in education, and she was so excited she could barely get the words out. My parents read the letter, and Mom said she was thrilled Gabriella was following her actual interests rather than just picking something that sounded impressive. Dad agreed and said he couldn't wait to hear about her experience working with younger kids. I felt proud watching them celebrate what Gabriella actually wanted instead of what they thought she should want, knowing I'd played a part in shifting their thinking about success. The next week I got my promotion bonus and decided to treat my family to dinner at this nice Italian place downtown. We sat at a big table by the window and ordered too much food and laughed about the chaos of those few weeks when everything fell apart. Dad made a joke about the great internet outage, and Gabriella groaned, remembering how she couldn't do her homework. Mom got a little teary and said sometimes things have to break before you can fix them properly. I raised my glass and said I was glad we figured it out, and everyone clinked their glasses together. Driving home that night, I checked my banking app out of habit and realized my savings account had hit a level where I could afford a down payment on a small house instead of just renting. I started looking at property listings on my phone during lunch breaks, browsing through photos of little houses with yards and garages. When I mentioned it to my parents over dinner, they said they supported whatever I decided to do, but wanted me to know I was welcome to stay as long as I wanted. The offer felt genuine this time, not like they were just being polite or trying to keep my rent money. A few days later, Gabriella and I were doing our Sunday breakfast thing, and she told me she'd been talking to her friends about living with me. She said she told them having me around was like having a cool older sister who actually got what it was like to deal with parental pressure. I flipped the pancakes and asked what her friends thought about that. Gabriella said they were jealous because their siblings either didn't live at home anymore or were annoying younger kids. I realized our relationship had become genuinely important to both of us, beyond just surviving that initial mess with my parents. It wasn't about obligation or family drama anymore. It was real connection. The following month, I got an email from my old college asking if I'd be interested in speaking on a career panel for current students. They wanted someone who'd gone into marketing to talk about the job search process and building a career after graduation. I said yes and forwarded the email to my family. The day of the panel arrived and I drove to campus feeling nervous about public speaking. I walked into the auditorium and spotted my whole family sitting in the third row, including Gabriella, who was starting to think about her own college choices. Having them there cheering for me felt like proof that we really did fix what was broken. I talked about my job and the promotion and how I'd learned to advocate for myself, and afterwards Gabriella told me I did great and asked questions about applying to colleges. My parents hugged me and said they were proud, and this time I knew they meant it, because they'd learned to show up for the things that actually mattered. A week after the career panel, my parents asked me to sit down at the kitchen table for a serious conversation, and I got nervous thinking they wanted to talk about money again. Dad pulled out some papers and said they'd been to their lawyer to update their will and wanted me to know about the changes they made. Mom explained that they split everything equally between Gabriella and me, which should have been obvious from the start, but they wanted me to hear it directly from them. She said they see us both as their daughters, and the paperwork now reflected that truth in a way their words hadn't always shown. I felt something loosen in my chest because the gesture meant way more than any actual money I might inherit someday. It represented them finally treating us as equals, instead of ranking us against each other. The conversation shifted to my house hunting, and I told them I'd been looking at places about 20 minutes away, close enough to visit, but far enough to feel like real independence. Dad nodded and said that sounded perfect, that I deserved my own space after everything we'd been through together. 2 weeks later, I found a little house with 2 bedrooms and a backyard that fit my budget exactly, and I called my parents from the driveway after viewing it. I put in an offer that same day, and spent the next 3 days checking my phone every 5 minutes waiting to hear back from the seller. When my realtor called to say the offer were accepted, I actually jumped up and down in my office and had to explain to my coworkers why I was so excited. The closing process took about a month, and during that time, my whole family helped me pick out furniture and plan the layout of each room. Moving day arrived on a sunny Saturday in late spring, and everyone showed up at my parents' house at 8 in the morning to load boxes into trucks. Gabriella immediately called dibs on the guest room and said she'd need a place to escape when our parents drove her crazy with their questions about college applications. We hauled furniture and boxes for hours, my dad directing traffic while my mom unpacked kitchen stuff, and Gabriella arranged books on shelves. By evening, we were exhausted and sweaty, so we ordered 3 large pizzas and sat on my new living room floor eating straight from the boxes. Mom suggested we christen the place with a movie night, and everyone agreed. So we pulled up cushions and blankets and watched some comedy while making plans for the next family dinner at my place. 3 months into owning the house, I was standing in my kitchen on a Sunday morning making pancakes for Gabriella, who'd spent the night after a fight with our parents about curfew. She sat at my counter complaining about how they treated her like a baby, and I flipped the pancakes thinking about how far we'd all come from that night when my parents begged me to stay. I got everything I actually wanted without even realizing it was possible. A family that respects me and shows up for the important stuff. A home that's completely mine with a mortgage I can afford, and a relationship with Gabriella built on genuine connection instead of competition or obligation. It happened because I finally stood up for myself when they pushed me too far. And they finally listened instead of dismissing what I needed, and now we had something better than what we started with because we'd all learned how to treat each other right.